Okay, I know a bunch of us are leaving and a bunch of us are arriving, but that's okay. You signed up for this class. This is the way we're going to roll. So today we're going to start looking at this thing called military tribunals as opposed to regular civilian trials. Can you identify for me typical traits of a regular civilian trial? You're arrested for armed robbery and you find yourself in a trial. What truths exist in that trial? What can you tell me about that situation you're going to find yourself in? Go ahead. Yeah, a lawyer. Very good. A lawyer. What if you can't afford one? One will be appointed. Very good. Free of charge? Yes, free of charge. Okay. You get your own lawyer. What else do we know? Throw out anything. There's a judge. Does the judge determine your guilt or innocence?
No.
Who does?
The jury of your peers.
A jury. So what's the judge for?
Be the king.
Be the king. Just to be? You ever thought about that? What is the judge for? The judge does not judge. Yeah, I shouldn't have said that. The judge does judge. The judge judges the fairness of the trial. The jury decides whether or not you did it. But the judge doesn't determine your guilt. What the judge does is make sure that the trial is run correctly. Okay? What about the assumption of the jury? What do they have to assume? Very good. Innocent until proven guilty. What about a jury of 12 people? How many have to say you're guilty before you are guilty? Out of 12?
7.
7? Majority? Yeah. Any other guesses? All 12. It has to be unanimous. All 12. Now, I know in some states there could be one dissent, so it could be 11-1. But in Wisconsin, all 12 have to say you're guilty before you are found guilty. Also, all 12 have to say you're not guilty to be found not guilty. What if the score is, I don't know, 8-4? Let's say 8 say you're guilty and 4 say you're not guilty. What happens?
Review.
It's a retrial. Exactly right. It's called a hung jury. The jury cannot determine the outcome, and so they have to report to the judge. We can't decide. 8 of us said guilty, 4 of us said not guilty, and the judge in that case would have to say, all right, let's do it all again, or never mind. And they'd let you go, not because they found you not guilty, but because they failed to determine the outcome. But they would have the right to put you on trial again. Hey, what is that called? You have the constitutional right to not be put on trial again for the same crime. You cannot they can't just keep finding a new jury until they find you guilty. Why not? What does that violate? What's the principle? Any future lawyers in here? Yes, you did. What is it called?
No.
Well, okay, let me give you a scenario here. Okay, by the way, based on a true story. Woman is convicted of killing her husband. They never found the body, but they convicted her anyway based on circumstantial evidence. She rotted in prison for 20 years. She served her punishment. She then went home. A little while later, her husband appears, so she kills him. Ooh. And then her argument when she was arrested was, oh, don't worry, I've already been punished for this crime. I was punished first. Then she killed him.
Wait, why you in the first?
That's a good question. I believe he was having some sort of a marital affair or something, and the cops couldn't find it, so they assumed that she killed him. So did the state, I don't even know what state, did the state say, oh, yeah, good point. And then that was it?
No.
Why could they put her on trial again? Same crime. Okay, so let me give you the answer. It's called double jeopardy. You cannot be put on trial again for the same crime until they find you guilty. They can't, right? You got one shot, state, and if they put you on trial again, that's called double jeopardy. They can't do that. Now, in this case, by the way, I used to do mock trial, so we'd have lawyers come, and so I asked them, what happened in that situation, right? She was already convicted, first served her time, and then did the crime. Did the state say, well, there's nothing we can do? And apparently the answer is, well, no, they would be able to punish you again because sandwich. Jimmy John's. They only deliver 5 minutes away because sandwich. All right. That whole thing, the presumption of innocence, the requirement that you are assumed innocent, that all 12 jury have to find you guilty before you're guilty. That's all part of a civilian trial. That is not a military trial. So what happened was that after 9/11, the federal government decided to set up military trials. And there are different rules. So this is George Bush coming up with this idea, which, by the way, a bunch of Republicans really didn't support. They were uncomfortable with the idea of giving the state that much power. But nevertheless, these things were created. And so the question I'm going to have you all think about is this a good idea? I guess we should identify, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between a military trial and a regular trial? So on the right are regular trials, the ones that you and I would face if we're ever accused of anything. And on the left is, well, how do military trials work? So, for example, in a regular trial, the judge is there to make sure the trials run correctly, but it's a jury that decides if you're guilty or not guilty. In a military trial, the judge is the jury. The judge is the jury, and there are three. There are three judges. It's a military tribunal, three. They are the judges, and they are the jury. Think about that. Why? Why not have a jury? Any logic? There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just wondering, when they came up with this idea of a military trial, why did they say, let's get rid of juries? Okay, very good. You're on the right track. He said so we can kill the terrorists faster. Not exactly, but you're on the right track. Which case do you think more likely results in a guilty verdict? A trial where there's 12 jurors and it has to be found unanimous, or 3 judges who are also the jury? Which more likely results in guilty? There's no right or wrong answer here. Well, there is a right or wrong answer, but don't be afraid to guess.
The judges.
Yeah, it's more likely that you find guilty verdicts in when the 3 judges are the jury. And so what we have to figure out is, well, why? Why is it more likely? But just think statistically. If you have 12 people and just one of them says not guilty, hung jury. Statistically, you're more likely to find one person who disagrees in a group of 12 than in a group of 3. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's keep going here. In a regular trial, all 12 have to say guilty or not guilty. Otherwise, it's a hung jury. In a military trial, it's 2 out of 3. So again, think about that. Which is more likely to find a guilty verdict? One where all 12 have to say guilty, or one where 2 out of 3 have to say guilty? 2 out of 3, right? It's just statistics, right? It's just math. Okay, let me explain this one. Okay, let's say that Ethan here, I know he's a drug dealer. I know it. So I'm a cop. And I go to a judge and I say, I know Ethan's a druggie. I know it. I know he's a dealer. Give me a search warrant to go through his house. And the judge says, absolutely not. He's a fine, upstanding member of the community. He's an athlete. He's adorable. He's got dimples. No, you do not have permission to search his home. I'm not giving you a search warrant, but I do it anyway. I search his house anyway, and I find it. I find all the evidence I need, plus the kidnapped children, right? I take pictures of everything. I take pictures of everything. I got it. I go to the cops. I show them all the evidence. We arrest him, take him to trial. I'm about to show the evidence to the jury of all the drugs and the kidnapped children and all that, and what happens? Yes, what happens? What happens in a regular trial?
They won't take it.
The judge throws it all out because all that evidence was illegally obtained. Illegally obtained evidence is not admissible in a regular trial. All that goes out the door. Okay?
Just this. Yeah.
But in a terrorism trial with a military tribunal, all that is not thrown out. It all can be used. And then in a separate trial, I would be put on trial for illegally obtaining evidence. But why throw out the perfectly good evidence? Think about this. Here's another way of thinking about it, okay? You are the first to show up at a Nazi concentration camp at the end of World War II. You are the American Army. You're liberating Dachau, okay? And you discover the experiment room. The room where Nazi scientists conducted experiments on Jewish prisoners of war. They did all sorts of nasty things. And the gold mine is if you found a twin. Oh, if you found Jewish twins, the Nazis were happy because then now they've got their control and now they've got their experiment. So they would give person A sugar and person B some sort of experimental drug, and now we can study the differences because they're twins. And that's scientifically viable information, right? Oh, it was gold. Twins were gold. Anyway, so let's say you discover the scientific room, and there it is. The research, the results of the research. It's right there in notebooks. Do you take that research and use it? Or do you think, my God, the way this research was conducted makes it immoral for us to use the results? Right? It's a similar situation. I found out that he was a drug dealer, but the way I found out was illegal. Does that mean I have to throw out the evidence that he's a drug dealer? In a jury trial, the answer is, yeah, throw it out. You can't use it because of the immoral way that you acquired the information. But in a military trial, use it. Use it. In a separate situation, then we can convict you of illegally obtaining the evidence. Okay? Now, again, let's think about it. Which is more likely to result in a guilty verdict? Where you can use it, obviously, right? All right. Now, does it encourage illegally obtaining evidence?
Probably.
Yeah, but aren't I going to get in trouble?
Yeah.
See your way around that, right? I'm not saying right or wrong answer here, but before you conclude, well, then the government's just going to illegally obtain evidence all the time. Are they? Aren't those people going to get in trouble for illegally obtaining the evidence in a separate situation? So there's your out. Okay. Last one. Let's say that during his entire, you were put on trial now for being a druggie. Okay. And during his entire trial, his lawyer's sleeping. Never calls any witnesses, never questions anyone. Defense, your witness. And shockingly, he's found guilty. He's found guilty. Can he appeal?
Yes.
Yeah. What's his appeal argument?
Unfair trial.
Unfair trial, right? Which, by the way, is the only reason you can appeal. You cannot appeal saying, but I didn't do it. That's not what an appeal does. An appeal is a trial of the trial. An appeal is a trial of the trial. Was the trial fair? He could argue that his lawyer slept the entire time. He didn't get a fair trial. There's an appeal. There are no appeals in military tribunals. Where are you going to more likely get a guilty verdict? Right? Probably the tribunal. Okay. Before I do this, there are enough of you here now that I want to show you about a 4-minute summary of 9/11. We've never actually described what happened on 9/11. There are enough of you here now. I'm going to show you. It's about 4 minutes. Interesting.
Big towers are cool. Thank you, honey. What? What are you wanting to?
Where'd it go?
Oh my what? What did you want to? Ethan Greener said my name. So aggressive. Because it's fun. It's smack next to that.
Here it is.
Hey, buddy. What do you have? What do you have on there? We're attacking.
September 11th,
They said my name. They
2001,
said never mind.
a day of grief, a day of courage. This is how that day unfolded.
My daughter called me. She said, plane just flew into the World Trade Center. It's not even. It's got to be a Piper Cub or some clown was flying down the river.
At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston, with 92 aboard, traveling at a speed of 470 miles per hour, strikes the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex. Within minutes, officials coordinate the citywide emergency response. Their base of operations is a state-of-the-art command center located on the 23rd floor of 7 World Trade Center. With one tower in flames, the tragedy is only beginning. It is 9:03 when United Airlines Flight 175, with 65 aboard, traveling at the speed of 590 miles per hour, smashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. This aircraft strikes the corner of the South Tower. It rips a diagonally shaped gash from the 84th to the 78th floors. The South Tower lasts only 56 minutes before it succumbs at 9:59 a.m. The dust cloud billows outward for blocks. Victims stagger away. At 10:28, the television mast atop the North Tower spears straight down.
Once the collapse started, there really wasn't any way to stop it. It was just going to go all the way down once it got started.
Chaos in New York City. Power is down in Lower Manhattan. Phone lines jammed with more than 230 million calls. Hundreds of firefighters trapped in the towers. Hundreds more race to the scene. Falling debris from the collapse of the North and South Towers ignites fires in the neighboring buildings of the World Trade Center. World Trade 4, 5, and 6 are ablaze. World Trade 7, the building housing the city's command center, burns unchecked for 7 hours. At 5:20, it collapses. The city's emergency nerve center is destroyed.
Somewhere in that time, and it's very hard to keep track of time during this, they had been ordered to evacuate number 7 by the Port Authority. To this day, we don't know who gave that order, but whoever it was saved a lot of people's lives.
With New York a war zone, some residents walk across the Brooklyn Bridge to get out of the city. Others seek escape in vessels piloted by the Army Corps of Engineers. At 7:45 p.m., the New York Police Department says 78 officers are missing and estimates that 200 firefighters are dead. At 10:56 p.m., police officials say they believe there are victims alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center.
Working with urban search and rescue teams, there was a lot of areas to be searched underneath the debris field. There were voids that had to be searched for possible live people.
September 11th, 2001, the longest and most tragic day in New York's history, is drawing to a close.
I'm at a point where I always assume everyone's seen that, right? But with each year, it becomes less and less likely. How many of you have never seen that before? Never seen the towers collapse before?
Oh, wait, no, I've seen that.
Most of you still see it. Okay. I was home that day because I had broken my arm, and I was getting a new cast, and so I saw it live on TV, and so I wasn't in school that day. So, but I mean, obviously, altering. Yes.
I was working at Washington County Government Center in Stillwater when that happened, and the county just pulled out TV for a couple of things.
Yeah. And the weirdest thing was that for the next several days, no planes in the air. There were no planes in the air. All planes were ordered grounded. And above the Twin Cities, an F-16 would fly. And so we'd all watch this one F-16 flying. And its job was to protect the Twin Cities from whatever. Anyway, any questions? We've already learned, you already know why they did it. You know who did it. And now you've seen the actual event itself. Right? Okay, getting back to this. what's going to happen is I'm going to divide you into 3 groups. Group 1, you have column 1. Group 2, you have column 2. And group 3, you have column 3. And what I'm going to ask you to do is consider the question that's at the bottom of each column. Should this be a matter for a regular civilian trial? Is a civilian trial the better way to handle this? Or should it be a military trial situation? Okay. So for now, I'm just going to number you 1, 2, 3. If you're a 1, will you just gather at this table? If you're a 2, say that table. And then if you're a 3, that table, right? So here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. That's 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 3. Okay. Up. Go over. Sit.
Yeah, where are we going again?
1s, 2s, 3s.
3s. Okay, so let's try it.
This is something we're going to accomplish in class today. We will be done with this exercise today, I hope. Okay, within your group, submit into 2 separate groups. A, B, A, B, A, B. Split. Go. Submit into 2 groups. Half of you A, half of you B. Okay, it should be about even. So if you're a group of 7, 4 of you versus 3 of you. Okay. If you are the A within your group, I want you to move 1 table away from me. If you're the B, I want you to move 1 table toward me. So the B's of this group, you're sitting here. The A's of that group, you're sitting there. Go. Split.
I guess we gotta move. Yes.
If you guys are these.
Okay, so now here's what you guys should be sitting there. Right? I want to give some distance between you and your sparring partners here. Okay.
Sparring.
Okay. So away from me are those people that are arguing yes to the question, and closer to me are those people that are going to be arguing no to the question. And the question is the same for all 3. Should this be put before a military trial? Yes, says those 3 groups. No, says these 3 groups. Not is he guilty or not. It's how should we determine if this person is guilty or not. Okay? You 3 groups are arguing that this situation would be better served having a military trial situation. And you know what that means because that previous slide that I showed you says, well, there is no jury. There's a presumption of guilt. It only takes 2 out of 3. There's no appeal. If you're found not guilty, illegally obtained evidence can be used. More likely guilt. And you 3 need to be arguing why that makes sense in this situation. That it's a military type situation. You 3 groups are arguing, no, it should be a jury trial situation. That the situations here do not warrant a military trial way of dealing with it. Again, not if the person's guilty or not. That's a separate question. How should we determine if this person's guilty or not? Military, 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 not military, not military, not military. And this is the first one, right? The American Civil War one, YouTube. And this one is the Germans who snuck into New York. and U2 is the Japanese behavior in the Philippines. Okay. I will gladly come and sit with each group and sort of give you some pointers about what you're going to do, because what's going to happen in about 5 minutes, 7 minutes, looks like, that group will stand up and explain why you think that this situation warrants a military trial response. This group will then stand up and say, nah, it really should be a civilian trial response. And then I will ask 2 questions from these 4 tables. What would you do if you were the person that got to decide, should it be a military trial situation or should it be a civilian trial situation? What would your vote be? And then what do you think happened? 1, what would you do? Number 2, what do you think actually happened? Because by the way, these are all real. Okay. Any questions before? So what you need to do is come up with reasoning for why you think it should be a military trial versus reasoning why it shouldn't be a military trial, regular civilian trial. And again, I will happily kind of quickly sit with each of you and say, hey, think about this, think about that. Okay? All right, I'll revisit you all in about 5 minutes. But okay, you can start reading your situation and thinking about what
I mean, what? Yeah, I know, right? Like this, that should it'd so be a military.
The first one was kind of easy.
Yeah.
Because it was under the direct authorization of
These people aren't even. We are in World War II right now.
Yeah.
We were fighting them. They landed soldiers. It literally says German soldiers right there.
Yeah.
So can we argue that we're wrong? That like saying no is wrong.
What did he do? What did he do? What did the milling?
That's the whole point of this
I know.
for that situation.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, why is Spanish suckers so damn hard to open? Spanish. Chupa chup. That was trippy. Oh shoot, wait. And no. Actually, it's not bad. It gives me a headache. I can already tell. What? It gives me a headache. It's not. I mean, yeah, it's not good.
What do you mean it gives you a headache?
Gives me a headache.
Why are you getting headaches?
I don't know. It just tastes like a headache. Want to taste it?
But it's Spanish. Dude, I've had like 4 Spanish talking in my life, and they're all nasty.
There were crimes in the United States during World War II. They didn't set up a military trial, even though it was during World War II.
What is me?
But also,
Me?
has to factor in
Me means me. Actually, wait.
It's a flavor.
No. Headache.
That's why it should be a civilian.
Yeah.
What is it though?
I don't know. It's like a strawberry banana. Try and see if it tastes.
I ain't getting no headache today, bro.
Bro, come on, just take a lick. At least take a lick. One lick.
But it is the whole time. Like, so
If you look at taking a lick, right? No, hey, come on, just lick. Just take a lick, please.
But that's not the case here. This guy's a civilian.
I ain't trying to get no headache.
This guy's a soldier.
Okay.
Now it's got panic on though.
No, it doesn't. All right, lick that
Now you're
one
gonna die.
side. Lick that one side. Bro,
No.
come on. Hey, you will
I
lick
ain't want
it.
no headache.
You lick it if you lick it.
Pass on that.
He'll be licking after you.
You still pass.
All right, fine. I'll eat it if you lick it. So I'll be getting a headache. You'll be tasting it.
Nah, I'm chilling.
Bro, you're gonna be licking it.
Why would I want to get a headache, bro?
You're not gonna get a headache. You're just gonna lick it. Oh, why is my ear?
Why is this group so much bigger than that group?
I don't know. Oh, we have 5. They had 4. No, they have 4. Wait a second. Why do we have 6 now?
This person came over at the last second to join us.
Oh,
What are you guys going to say?
We're
Exactly.
wrong. We're literally wrong.
Yeah.
Like we're
There's no
wrong.
reason.
So you're gonna stand up and say, "Hey, everybody, we're wrong."
We are wrong. We should not
If
be
you say
arguing.
we're wrong one more time,
We're not correct.
Well, we are
Not
not
correct.
right.
Lord, if I'm ever put on trial, may he not be my lawyer. Ladies and gentlemen, jury, my guy did it.
He did do it.
You're a terrible liar.
I am a terrible lawyer.
You gotta play first.
Right.
What's strength?
Well, let's
Okay,
think
but
about
you gotta read it. 8 German soldiers
Will you just
in
let me-
1942.
You're on the wrong side. Go over there. You're he's
World
on your
War
team now.
II.
You're over there. For the rest of you who aren't giving up, gather.
You're going back there, Dreamer.
It took place during World War II, right?
Yeah.
Does that make it automatically a war crime?
Yes.
No. When an event takes place is part of it, but that can't be the only part. If when it takes place is the only determining factor, then when I stole a flashlight during World War II, that would be a military trial because it took place during World War II. There's also something else called where. Where did it happen? And how many battles took place in New York?
None.
0. Where it happened matters. It did not take place. It took place in New York. New York was not a war zone. There were still civilian trials going on in New York. There's your way out. And by the way, you need to emphasize this, ladies, everybody else. We're not saying that these Germans don't deserve to be put on trial. They absolutely should be, and they should be convicted if they did it. But what we're saying is, because of where it took place, not in a war zone, that means it should be a regular civilian trial.
We got
You should be on this team.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
I need you.
He's on this team.
You guys got the easy
Okay,
part.
you sit down and
He's
I'll
on
bring
this
you up to speed.
You have to convince these people that these 8 Germans should be put before a civilian trial, not a war. It's an uphill climb, but you can do it.
Okay. So Potter was just saying that just because even though they were German soldiers, it didn't take place in a war zone. It took place in New York. And in New York, there were still civilians and everything. It wasn't a war zone.
Yeah,
No,
and they.
okay, that isn't that.
Yeah.
I think just the part where the area is our
civilian.
civilian area.
It was a civilian attack on a civilian factory in a civilian area
Yeah, it wasn't
by
heavy.
soldiers,
But it wasn't in
but
a
they didn't use
military.
weapons.
Yeah, they didn't use weapons.
That wasn't a war zone.
Yeah. You got it, Will? Can you save us?
Let's try. Let's say, hey, well, let's go in. So we're on the second one then?
Yeah.
Absolutely should face consequences.
Oh, and Will, don't forget to say that we don't think that they're not guilty. We just think that it should be a civilian trial.
Civilian trials aren't a viable notion. World War II ended. Civilian trials are over. You're not saying you're not going to find this person. If the evidence says he's guilty, he's guilty. You don't need a military. War's over. Are we ready to try this?
Call Will.
Well, too bad. We're going to do it. Okay? So this is what's going to happen. I am going to read the situation, and then that team will try and convince you 4 tables that it should be dealt with in a military trial situation. Then this table will try and convince you that actually a civilian trial is the way to go. You're free to ask a few questions if you want to ask. And then I'm going to ask you 2 things. 1, how would you vote? If you got to decide whether the person should face a military or a civilian trial, how would you vote? And then what do you think happened?
So, what did we do yesterday?
Will,
Okay.
I tried to defend.
Here we go. American Civil War, right? The North and the South. President Lincoln
killed
declares
the
that
amendments.
military trials
tried
would be
defending
used
them.
against all rebels, no matter where they acted.
But he silenced me.
This guy named Milligan
He silenced me.
in Indiana, which, by the way, no battles took place in Indiana.
That's true.
He's involved in a conspiracy. He sneaks into a federal warehouse, and he's going to try and steal the guns. He will then, the plan is, travel to the South, arm the rebels, and lead a conspiracy, a rebellion against the Union. He's caught, and now what do we do with him? Should it be before a military trial or a regular civilian trial? That team convinced us it should be a military trial. You will stand when you were talking.
Okay, so it should be a military trial because it was during like the Civil War in America. It shouldn't be a civilian trial just because because it's a Civil War in America, the jury is going to be American civilians, so like kind of like people who are on both sides. And he committed a federal crime that was both a military thing and a military trial.
Anything else? Sounds like a slam dunk case. Convince us that it should actually be a civilian trial. Nice and loud.
Indiana wasn't a war zone. They didn't kill anybody. Well, maybe he did.
Nice.
Okay, he didn't kill anybody. He wasn't a soldier. Why? How can you put someone into a military trial who wasn't even fighting the war? How's that work?
We'll see. How's that work? Any response? If not, that's fine. Okay. Any questions or comments before we vote?
Huh?
Okay, so question one is, if it were up to you, you got to decide this Milligan, should he be before a military situation or a civilian? How many of you would say military? It's obviously, you don't get to vote. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. How many of you would say nah, civilian? 1, 2. 13 to 2. That doesn't add up.
Twice?
Okay.
I voted first time.
I don't know if I believe you.
Ex parte Milligan. So ex parte is Latin for in the matter of. Anytime the Supreme Court makes any ruling, they always call it ex parte, whatever, in the matter of. Okay? So this is in the matter of this Milligan guy. Here's what the Supreme Court said. He was put on trial in a military trial, found him guilty. And then the Supreme Court was called in. And the Supreme Court said, wait a minute. You can only have martial law where you need martial law. There's no need to have martial law in Indiana because Indiana is not a war zone. Indiana is far from a war zone. Regular courts are open. As a result, Milligan should have been put before a regular civilian court. And as a result, you people were wrong. You were wrong.
I just thought it was like
I was
countrywide,
right.
but maybe not. I don't know.
What?
That's what we were doing.
You were right. The two of you were right.
Yeah.
I switched.
Now, by the way, what we've just done is set the table. I invite the rest of you to consider that you can use precedent for your arguments. You could say, well, we should do this because look what they did back then. That is allowed. Okay? All right. Oops.
Wait. Oh.
Hey. Oh,
Here we are.
Now we saw it.
World War II. That's these two groups. Here we go. 1942. By the way, this is a true story. A German submarine landed in New York Harbor. 8 Germans get out, and they wreak havoc in the city.
Like a grand old
They
time.
dressed like civilians. Their mission was to sabotage. Greatest word in the English language, besides milk.
What's up, friend?
So sabotage
Dog.
factories. They're caught. They're arrested. FDR sets up a special tribunal for the 8 and recommends that they put on trial. Now, that group convinces it should be a military trial. Go.
Okay, so even though it wasn't on during the actual battlefields of the war, I think that it should still be a military tribunal because it was military people coming to sabotage our military defense factories. So that's kind of military fighting military. And military matter. and he authorized tribunals for those because they were included in the even though they didn't succeed in it, they came across those with intent to
Okay, I'm not done with you yet, Kaylee. So let's just try and identify what the difference is between this situation and this situation. Over here, who's being put on trial? What I mean by that is nationality. American. Germans. Are we at war with Germany?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Over here, were they soldiers? Was he?
No.
Nope. So maybe there's a difference there.
Yeah, it's military and military.
Very good. All right.
It is military.
Convince us that it should be a civilian trial.
All right.
Team
Come on,
Wells.
Will.
So, so
Kevin Nick.
a little bit of background on military tribunals. They're meant to be used in war zones to expedite trials because civilian trials take forever because you have to gather the jury and the judges for civilians. They take up to months, right? So tribunals are supposed to be in war zones against, say, prisoners of war or your own soldiers who have mutinied or whatever, to try and expedite things so you can continue with the business at hand, which is, murdering other people. Now, this should be a civilian trial because it was in a civilian area and the targets were civilian targets, being factories populated by civilians, and also the kind of the precedent of, if you want to go back 100 years, then you go the precedent of, this case, which basically is some dude, trying to help the enemy, which at that point you'd be caused as a defector, meaning that you are an enemy of the state, which you kind of at war with the United States at that point, meaning that people we were at war with, and we were at war with the Confederates at the same time as well, and we still put him on a civilian trial. And also, New York wasn't under martial law last time I checked in 1942, so military tribunal shouldn't apply there either.
You're arguing against military trials.
Yeah.
Okay, just check. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was calling her then.
Okay. You were
Who's
like,
the
oh,
precedent?
there should be a trial of civilians. They were German, so are they gonna have like German civilians? Because doesn't it like the whole like jury of your peers come into play? They have American people try a German soldier.
Well, generally, peers is just people from like the same area the crime was committed. So if you went to Washington and committed a crime, then people from Washington would be on your jury, kind of. Or if you went to, Iraq and did the same thing, then people from Iraq would be on your
Yeah, but if
jury.
you think about like the race thing, when that was like the
Race?
racial issues, when they're like, oh,
There's
it's
still
not
Germans
fair
in
to try someone who's black and the jury is all white people. Like,
No, that was
Did you have something to say? Keith? Danny? Only Will can remain seated.
It says dressed, so that doesn't mean they're actually civilians.
I never said they were civilians.
Yeah, he did.
Just making a point. They were dressed as civilians.
They're dressed as civilians, but they're still soldiers acting on orders given to them by German officers. And their mission, which is a German mission, not a
Proof of what?
civilian
Right
mission, is an act of war.
Any questions?
I mean, I'd argue
I
that
forgot to ask you guys to predict what actually happened in that previous one. I apologize. So
I'd argue that
Yo,
two questions.
no, we
did.
voted.
yo,
You voted what you would have done, but I forgot to ask you to
Well, isn't
predict
that the same
what
type
heck.
of thing?
No, not really.
No.
and then
Not
you
necessarily.
tell-
I was gonna
You can vote one way, but say, but I think this is what actually happened.
I guess that's true. I would argue that was an act of war in the first one too, though, because he was attacking a U.S. Armory base, U.S. Armory, which is actually property of the U.S. military, not just a defense factory, which could be a Chevrolet factory that the U.S. government told them to make tanks that year. Same type of thing.
But it's still.
So for the rest of you four groups, what you have to decide is the difference between this column and this column enough to warrant a war trial? Does it matter to you that these were Germans, not Americans? Does it matter to you that they were soldiers, not civilians? Does it matter to you that they were out of uniform, which violates rules of war? Does it matter to you that they were targeting defense factories, right? Factories that made war toys.
He was
Does
defense.
that
was
matter
defense
to you?
building.
Okay.
Precedent.
So how many, again, two questions this time, sorry. And this is for that table, that table, that table, that table. How many of you would decide this warrants a military trial? Base it also on precedent if you think it applies.
We took a fat
3,
L.
4, 5,
We took
6,
a
7,
fat
8,
L.
9, 10. Ooh, this is gonna be close. How many of you say not civilian?
Good job, Will.
You don't get to vote. Oh, I guess it's not close. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Some people never vote.
You gotta vote. Revote. Vote. How many of you think military? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Revan. How many of you think civilian?
Dang it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Count
11 to
Garrett.
5.
He didn't
Okay, second question. What do you think happened? How many of you think it was a military trial? It was handled militarily?
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, you guys can vote this one. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. How many of you think not was handled in a civilian way because of the precedent established by the American Civil War thing?
Well, I think
So
that's
none of you
dumb.
think that these things are similar.
I mean, they're.
All right, let's see. In the matter of Quirin, this is Milligan. Hold on. Ex parte Quirin, in the matter of Quirin. Okay. So again, they were put on trial before a military tribunal. They were found guilty. However, they appealed to the Supreme Court and they said, "Hey, Supreme Court, what about Milligan?" So they had a good lawyer.
Did they
who
think
said-
that they were? Did they get an American lawyer?
Yeah, definitely. American lawyer.
Did they think that they were going to win in a civilian court?
Hold on. It gets more interesting. Let me muck up it for a second here. So again, I'm gonna tell you this and then I'll show you what happened. One of the 8 is an American citizen.
What? You didn't say that.
I'm now telling you.
Why didn't you say that?
What, just hold on.
That
a
would have
second.
been important.
Okay, well, I'm allowing you to make this prediction. One of them pointed out that he had American citizenship and just happened to be in Germany when he was drafted into the German military. He then argued that because of his American citizenship, he had the right to an American jury trial. Is he right?
Yes.
How many of you say, got a point? He should face a civilian trial.
I suppose.
I want hands here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
I mean,
10, 11, 12,
you're not
13,
wrong,
14,
I
15.
suppose.
How many of you say, too bad?
So sad.
You need a military trial.
Yeah, good old hangings.
Let's,
Nah, they shot him.
those of you who argued for the 7 military, you're right. The Supreme Court denied their argument because it wasn't Lincoln. This time it was Congress, so separation of powers, that matters a little bit. And because of their actions, they made New York a war zone.
Well,
A war zone is where there is belligerence taking place. By their actions, they made New York a war zone. Now, you might argue, what about Milligan? Didn't he, by his actions, make it a war zone? And I guess the answer is, well, no, because he's an American civilian, and these guys were German soldiers.
That one civilian?
that's
okay.
what we're getting to.
Yeah. Fine. So, Milligan only applies to non-belligerents, non-soldiers, right? So this is the answer to the what about that one American dude? So it says here that one German claimed U.S. citizenship, and basically the Supreme Court said, you renounced your citizenship when you joined the German army. You are not an American. You renounced that. Okay? So most of you were right. All right, last one. We are doing this today.
Renounces.
Okay, last one. Here it is. So these two. A Japanese general. There's his name. I'm going to try. And he's put before a military trial. He's accused of war crimes, atrocities, when the Japanese controlled the Philippines. How many of you have ever heard of the Bataan Death March? Bataan Death March is when the Japanese army forced Americans and Filipino soldiers on foot to walk about 60 miles. And if any of them took a break or fell, they bayoneted them and killed them. Okay? Violating rules of warfare about how you're supposed to treat POWs. He's caught. The Japanese general was caught. And they said, well, you need to face the consequences. But then the war ended. The war ended before the trial. Convince us that it should be a military trial. Go, Stan.
Okay. So, obviously, this dude committed an act of war. It was something that he did during the war. He was a soldier or a general of a different country, and so he wasn't a U.S. citizen at all. And regardless of the fact that his case wasn't put on trial by the time that he had by the time the war had ended, he still committed it during the war. And that is what I think is most important, is the fact that it was still not on American soil. It was an active war. He was a general, and he was an American. So there was no logical reason for him to have been in a civilian court.
Do you have something, Dad?
Japan also conquered the Philippines, making that a war zone.
Okay. So I just have a couple questions before. I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but here we go. If Japan conquered the Philippines, then isn't it Japanese territory?
But they conquered it, and while they were conquering
They did conquer it. So isn't it Japan? Okay, and then the second question, we have to be careful. You said he committed an act of war. Acts of war are not illegal. I know this is weird, but when the Germans shot the Americans landing on the beaches of Normandy, all those Germans were not arrested and put on trial. They didn't commit a war crime. This guy is accused of a war crime.
Oh, I meant to say
You
war.
can't march people against their will on foot, and then when they sit down to take a break, bayonet them to death while they're under your care. That's a prisoner of war. You can't do that. You can shoot Americans as they're landing in Normandy, but you cannot shoot them when they're under your control. They are now POWs. Rules apply.
Control.
There.
That's
now,
why.
Explain to us why it should be a civilian trial. Go.
It should be a civilian trial because the biggest thing is that, unlike in 1942 with the case of Kirin, the case with Yamashita was after the war had ended. And moreover, after the war had ended, the Philippines had become a U.S. territory, where civilian courts have been more applicable in the U.S., moreover than a Philippine.
Anything to add? Go ahead.
I mean, regardless of the fact that the war had ended by the time the trial happens, it's not like he committed the thing after the war ended. He still did it during the war. He was an American citizen, and at the time it wasn't American soil. So anything having to do with it being a U.S. territory doesn't matter because at the time it wasn't.
Anything else? All right, 2 questions. Question number 1, what would you say? You got to decide. How many of you would say war, military situation? Pretty much everybody. Anybody say civilian? Because what matters is it happened after.
I feel like you should have chosen more.
What do you think happened? Is there any part of you that says, all right, Potter's got something sneaky he's going to throw in at the last second and monkey up the thing? Oh, no, I can't tell you. I'll tell you tomorrow.
You don't have class? Oh, yeah,